Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Humanist Association of Oregon's April meeting. Visitors and members attending your first meeting are especially welcome. My name is Tony, and I'm part of the association's events team. And we also have Kat and Aiden assisting. At the beginning of our meetings, we always give a brief definition of humanism. Humanism is a simple philosophy. It is an ethical life stance which focuses on human values, being good without God. It is about taking responsibility and treating others with respect while living our one life. If you would like to know more or have a more in-depth description, the statement of the fundamental principles of modern humanism, otherwise known as the Amsterdam Declaration, is available online. Now, we will be having a question and answer session after the presentation, so if you'd like to take part, you can indicate by clicking on the raise hand symbol. And finally, the event is being recorded for the HEI events channel on YouTube, so if you're good with camera shy, just switch off the camera on your Zoom connection, but please do stay with us. Now, a basic income system for our state. What would it look like? How would it be implemented? And what could it mean for society in general? Here to discuss some proposals, we have Michelle Murphy, who is the Research and Policy Analyst with Social Justice Oregon. Among her main areas of interest are the impact of policy on income distribution, the interaction of a minimum social floor, and just transition and sustainability, and regional development. She's also responsible for Social Justice Oregon's European engagement, including the European semester and the Pillar of Social Rights. Well, Michelle, I know we've all been looking forward to your presentation enormously, so without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to yourself.
Thanks very much, Tony, for the invitation, and lovely to see so many people here this evening. So I'm just going to attempt to share my screen now. So hopefully you should all see my slides. Yeah. So basically, what I'm going to look at is pathways to a basic income. So first of all, just briefly run through what a basic income is, what it isn't, the benefits of a basic income system. Then look at different ways that one might implement a basic income system, whether you do it by groups, whether you do it all in one go, whether you run a basic income and the current system you have in parallel with each other. So there's different ways of doing it. Each comes with their advantages and disadvantages. And then look at the end, look at, how you might do it in Ireland over a period of 5 to 6 years, for example, and what that might look like. So hopefully it won't take too long. Hopefully it will hold your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. So what is a universal basic income? Well, the Basic Income Earth Network definition is it's an income unconditionally granted to everyone on an individual basis without means test or work requirement. So it's a minimum income scheme. It's different to social welfare benefits generally because it's paid to individuals, not to households. It's paid regardless of income from other sources. There isn't a work requirement. You don't have to take up a job if you're offered one. So it doesn't have those conditions, and generally it tends to be tax-free. And ultimately, the purpose of the basic income is to provide a floor of income below which nobody should fall. So that's in a nutshell. That's what a universal basic income is. Then what it isn't. So it's not a sole means of alleviating poverty. A basic income, it's a minimum income, it's a minimum floor. It's not going to be your sole means of alleviating poverty. You are going to look at, particular groups of very high rates of poverty, and you're still going to have to support those in other ways. A basic income, it's not an alternative to publicly funded education, healthcare, or an excuse to withdraw other public services. So there's a lot of debate at the moment around the concept of universal basic services and universal basic income, and often they're seen as incompatible with each other, but really they go hand in hand because you need a minimum floor. Everybody needs a minimum floor of income and of services. And obviously the better and more subsidized services that are provided by the state, then ultimately the lower the income floor needs to be. So what are the benefits of it? Well, it offers you choice and flexibility because it's a minimum floor that you always have. So for example, it promotes entrepreneurship. Hopefully the artist pilot that has just been announced by Minister Martin should obviously show increased productivity in terms of artistic output of the artists. It's work and employment friendly, so it eliminates poverty and unemployment traps. It promotes equity because it's paid to individuals, not households, and at least everyone receives at least that level, that threshold level of income. It spreads the burden of taxation more equitably. Men and women are treated equally under the system. Simple, transparent, it's efficient in labour market terms. And I suppose what it does do, and you know, that debate has come up now since the pilot has been announced. For example, people arguing potentially for a basic income for carers. Could you look at that cohort? You could certainly argue perhaps a space for basic income for seasonal rural workers, for people with a disability. So what it does, it rewards work in the social economy that generally the market economy ignores. So all that unpaid work that tends to be done in the home or caring duties, predominantly that's gendered work. So it rewards that type of work. You know, it facilitates training, education. I suppose as we look towards, you know, technological changes, upskilling is going to be more and more important. And I suppose it faces up to the changes in the global economy where there, you know, work has become more precarious, especially for people entering the labour market and the labour force. And it's, you know, that's not going to change. And we need to redesign I suppose, our social support, our welfare system to adapt to that as people move in and out of work or in between jobs, or if people, for example, aren't sure how many hours they're going to have available to them on a weekly basis. There's lots of international examples. So there's the United States, Canada, Finland, Brazil with the Fulsa Familia, the Netherlands, Sub-Saharan Africa. There was a lot of pilots there, mainly targeted at women. Spain and Barcelona, Kenya, Iran, and Wales have just announced a basic income pilot as well. So there's lots of examples. And then obviously we'll have the Irish pilot, which should be getting underway in June. So what about pathways then to a basic income? So, you know, how do you actually go about introducing a basic income? So this assumes once you set a pathway to a basic income, it assumes that the concept of a universal basic income, you know, has been accepted, and you know that's the system that is going to be implemented as, I suppose, your social support system. And obviously that rate has to be set. So a decision has to be made at what rate you actually set that basic income at. Then once you decide what that rate is, then you know, how do you implement it? So do you do it all at once? You know, just overnight, big bang? Do you do it by groups? So for example, people of working age, just older people, children, do you do a partial basic income for certain groups that goes in parallel with the current social welfare system? Do you do one slow step at a time, which, you know, is a very gradual approach, or do you take a more gradual approach? So maybe 3 to 5 years or a 5 to 8 year period. So there's different ways of doing this. All of them have advantages and all of them obviously have disadvantages. So the all at once approach, I suppose it's kind of the big bang. So for example, if government were to decide that they were going to expand the pilot for artists and make it universal in 2023, on midnight on the 31st of December 2022, the old system of social welfare and tax credits would be removed, and on the 1st of January 2023 you would immediately implement your basic income system. So it's an overnight change. Obviously this has its advantages. It immediately eliminates the current system or the old system, and everybody quickly realizes the benefits of the basic income because everybody gets it. Obviously this has disadvantages because number one, the change could be very drastic. Number two, you don't get the opportunity of a gradual lead in to do the testing to see, you know, does it have a negative impact on other payments, for example, you know, on other thresholds? Are there unintended consequences that you didn't foresee? And will it be too disruptive to do such a change so suddenly? And what sort of information and education campaign would you have to do beforehand to prepare people for this? So probably the disadvantages of this system could outweigh the advantages, given the amount of background work that has to go in, whereas you could also do that background work while implementing a system more gradually. Another way to do it is by groups. So this is an easy way to do it. You could set your rate, set your payment, and you pick certain groups in society and you introduce it to one after another. It's certainly less disruptive than the all-at-once approach. It's more politically feasible than the all-at-once approach, because you only have to persuade the political system to look at one group at a time, whereas the prospect of having to completely transform your taxation and social welfare system overnight can be, quite off-putting for politicians. Another advantage of this could help shift public opinion. Perhaps there were groups who were negative towards a basic income, but once they start getting the payments, they obviously see the advantages of it. The disadvantages of this system is obviously there are winners and losers. The winners are those who get it from the beginning. The losers are those who have to wait, a longer amount of time. This can cause resentment between life cycle groups. What it can also mean is actually the people who need it most are the people who get it last. Because if you're trying to make something more politically feasible and shift public opinion, you're probably going to have to pick a cohort or group that don't need it as much as another group in order to change that opinion, and the group that might need it most. So for example, persons with a disability, lone parents, for example, could be further down the line when it comes to getting it, because if you're trying to make it more politically acceptable and shift public opinion, it might be more advantageous to pick another group. So those are the advantages and disadvantages here. Wales has actually just introduced a basic income pilot for care leavers. So this is an example of the by groups approach, and actually the Welsh Government has targeted a very vulnerable cohort. So the pilot is open to 500 care leavers who are going to turn 18 from all local authority areas in Wales over a 12-month period. So it's going to run for at least 3 years, and all of the participants in the pilot, they're going to receive a monthly payment of £1,600 for at least 24 months from the month after their 18th birthday. So I suppose it'll be interesting to see the outcomes of this pilot and what impact that income support had on supporting a very vulnerable group. So I suppose this is a good example of promoting the positive aspects of a basic income while at the same time targeting what are a particularly vulnerable group with, I suppose, considerable needs as they leave care. Excuse me. So another example is a partial basic income. So it's different to the group's approach because you could introduce a partial basic income for some citizens. So for example, you could introduce an additional tax credit for young workers up to the age of 26, between 18 and 26, for example, or all people of working age. Or you could introduce an additional welfare payment for young people in education, or for older people living alone, and then gradually expand it and increase it over time. Obviously, it's less disruptive. It could allow for a smoother transition. People get to see the advantage of it. I suppose the disadvantage is it would take a considerable period of time. Then what you have is you end up with two systems running side by side. So you've a conditional regime, that would be the social welfare system, means tested benefits, etc. But then you also have a separate unconditional regime. But how will that interact with the conditional regime? How would it interact with other payments? How does it interact with other people in the household, for example, and payments that they might be entitled to? So, I suppose this would be if you were looking at a very long lead in time, it's something you could consider. But ultimately, it would take a considerable amount of time to, move a partial basic income and to turn it into a full universal basic income system. Then the other approach is just the gradual implementation. So you pick a time period. So, for example, you could pick 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, and you use that time to gradually dismantle the existing system. You establish your basic income system separately. You make sure that they work in cohort with each other. You do any lead-in time in terms of education campaigns, any testing in terms of unintended or consequences or otherwise, then you plan in terms of how you gradually phase out part of the existing tax and social protection system over that period of time, and how you gradually phase in the basic income system, and what elements need to be in place to do this. So this is a very planned approach. You'd certainly have an interdepartmental committee and a steering group, and the revenue commissioners and other involved. It would take a lot of planning, but it would also make the process a lot smoother. The advantages of this is that it overcomes the challenges of reforming the present system, because you're not constantly trying to reform the system that we have or make add-ons to it. You're developing a new system alongside it. It doesn't have the disruption of the all-at-once approach. It distributes the benefits and the costs equally, because one group is not being picked over another. Everyone would get a proportion of their basic income over the time. So it's gradual, and it allows you to do ongoing evaluation to see, is the system working? Are parts of it not working? Why aren't they working? What can be improved? Obviously, as I said, it requires very detailed planning. It does require political support. You need buy-in across the political system, because this is the type of approach you could look at it doing it in one term of office for government, but it would probably go over that. So you need to be sure that if you put a lot of work into developing this, that if there is a change of government in office, then all of this work, it is not then discarded. And you would need a very strong education and information strategy, to support and to let people know what is happening, how it's happening, when it's happening, and what it actually means for them and, their own benefits, whether it's in terms of tax credits or social welfare supports. So ultimately, if you're trying to design a pathway to a universal basic income, be it in Ireland or elsewhere, what you really have to do is demonstrate that you can build a basic income system and that it can work. You also have to make the case that it would be affordable, it's feasible, and that the transition to this system will be smooth, it will be gradual, and it will be operable, so it will work. So that, before you even get to the point of even setting the rate of your basic income, the very first, these are the first things that you're going to have to do. You're going to have to persuade both the policy system and the political system that you can build the structure, it is affordable, it's feasible, and that the transition is smooth, it's gradual, it's operable, and it will work, and it will benefit everybody. I suppose ultimately that's the purpose, that it should improve everybody's well-being and everybody's standard of living by setting that minimum social floor. So in terms of Ireland then, looking at, delivering a structure to support a basic income system, the first thing you would need to do is, if you're looking at universal payments, child benefit is our universal payment for children. Then you've job seekers benefit or allowance for people of working age. But when it comes to pension age, there isn't actually universal pension. There's either the state contributory pension or non-contributory. So you would need to introduce, on the social welfare side, introduce a universal pension. So that would be your first tier pension, your pension floor, and it would replace the contributory and non-contributory pension to be available for everyone 66 and over. On the tax side then, in terms of tax credits, if you're in employment, you're entitled to the 2 PAYE personal tax credits. You would need to make those refundable to ensure people in low paid employment also get the benefit of them. If you earn below a certain threshold, you actually don't get the benefit of your tax credits. Once you do both introduce those two reforms, then your system, both your revenue and your social welfare system, are fully universal, and that they can reach everyone in it. Once you do this, then you have everything is in place to develop the structure to support a basic income system. So you could do a 5-year approach. So over one Dáil term, for example, remembering that you're building the new system in parallel with the old system. So for example, in year one, you could introduce your universal pension to replace the state contributory and non-contributory pension. In year two, then you could introduce refundable tax credits, so that in terms of the revenue side and people in employment, that everybody in employment gets the benefit of those credits. So this means you have a system where everybody can be reached and targeted. Once these two changes have been made, then you can actually start your, gradually introducing the system. So in year three, for example, you could introduce the first third of the basic income system. So everybody would get 1/3 of their basic income, and you would still have 2/3 remaining through either tax credits or whatever welfare payment you're entitled to. Year four, you get 2/3 is delivered through the basic income system, 1/3 through the previous system. And in year five, finally, you would have your full basic income system up and running. Now, I suppose this would be a very optimistic time frame, because realistically, you would probably want to add another year or two onto this, both in terms of managing the implementation of the two universal elements, the universal pension and the refundable tax credit, also the designing the information strategy, the education strategy, the testing. So, I mean, a 5-year would be, it would be the ideal approach because it would fit within one dual term, but realistically, you would probably be looking at, between 5 and 7 years to fully get this off the ground and fully functional in an Irish context. But it is doable. It takes planning, it takes consultation, it takes political buy-in, but it is absolutely doable. And I suppose one thing that we have seen is that we can actually transform our social protection system very quickly. When the first lockdown came and the pandemic unemployment payment was established, the civil servants in the Department of Social Protection did a really good job of transforming that system overnight into a system where you could apply for your benefit online. It was delivered. It had a really fast turnaround time. They designed it, it worked really well. So we know we can do it. We know that we can design these systems. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for your time and your attention this evening. I'm happy to answer any questions.
That's great, Michelle. Thank you very much. Excellent presentation there. And we are now going to go over to our Q&A session. So let me see. Rach, I see you have your hand up there. If you just like to unmute yourself and you can ask your question. Oh, yes, it turns out that was applause. Very good. Very, very good. That's great. Actually, while we're waiting for questions, Michelle, can I ask you, has any studies been done into possible negative impacts? In other words, just for example, say if it's affordable for parents with young children to stay at home because they're receiving tax credit, would say the childcare industry would be negatively impacted?
Well, I suppose what the studies have shown is what it does is actually it allows a more even distribution of care for a lot of families. It actually, I suppose, looking in Brazil in particular, it was focused on families and children of Bolsa Familia. And what that did was it actually, I suppose, more families were, I suppose, supported to enroll their children in what we would call ECCE, the sort of preschool scheme, and then keep them in school for longer. That was paid up to families for children up to the age of 16. So it had a positive impact there. And what it does do, I suppose, it would support the European Pillar of Rights. I think it's a Pillar 16 on it. Flexible and family-friendly work-life balance. So, I mean, it supports families in terms of the first year of your child's life, for example. It gives you more options if both parents want to try and, between them, stay at home for an extended time over that period. Obviously, you can still avail of childbirth, but it just gives, the point of it gives people choice and flexibility. I mean, the level it's going to be set at is never going to be huge, But what it does do, it gives you choice. It doesn't force parents back into the workplace, because either their maternity benefit or their paternity benefit has run out. And I suppose what it would do is it could probably incentivize more paternity and parental leave among fathers, because at least you would have your basic income to support you, whether or not, depending on your employer, whether they topped up your paternity leave or not, but you would still have your basic income payment.
Very good. That's great, Michelle. Thank you. So we have a few people with their hands up now. So Dara, can we start with yourself? I think you were first to go there.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can indeed, yep.
Great. Michelle, excellent presentation. Thank you. I thought the whole universal income process was much simpler, and that it was like, for instance, everyone gets 15K per annum. And if I'm a good earner, after that, I get 15K from the state in the form of a tax credit. Or if I'm a homeless person, I get 15K in the normal way by way of a payout. And that, for instance, an unemployed person who gets a 15K allowance is then taxed on everything, is entitled to work, having received it, gets no tax credit, and has to pay all the normal marginal tax rates thereafter. Is that too simplistic? Is that, I'm looking for equity across our economy in the universal benefit system.
Yes, I mean, that's how, in theory, it should work. And if it was as simple as either someone in employment or someone who was unemployed, then yes, that's how it would work. But then you have to look at all the other people in society. So people with a disability, for example, who have a cost that will always be higher than the basic income. So they still need to be supported beyond that. So you have to develop a system that can not only provide them with the basic income, but will also provide them with whatever additional payment that might be required. So whether that's a cost of disability payment or something else. The same thing with an older person living alone, for example, generally has a higher cost of living. So while if it was just an employed person and an unemployed person, then yes, it should work exactly as how you say it. But the problem is, and in theory, that is what a universal basic income system is. But when you are designing it, you have to take into account, I suppose, everybody else within society and how it's going to interact with all the services and everything else that we provide for people, and also then how you fund it. But ultimately, it would, once you design it and implement it, it's just a much simpler system to run. And as you say, it's much for people who are in employment, you get your credit. If you're not in employment, you get it as a payment, and then everything you earn on top of that, that's taxed, but you'll always be better off in employment.
Yes, yeah, excellent. Because I often felt guilty. A decade or two ago, we were paying a mortgage and got huge mortgage relief allowance from the state as against the marginal tax rate, whereas the homeless person couldn't get that. So it was hugely inequitable. Under the universal benefit system, the homeless person and I would get exactly the same, either as a tax credit or a payout, and we would both be entitled to work all we wanted after receiving that payment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I suppose that's a lot of the problem with a lot of the benefits that are delivered through the tax system. So like you say, relief at the marginal rate, generally the more you earn, the more relief you get, but which is inequitable, because the people who need relief the most generally are on the lower income.
Exactly. Yeah. Look, that's very helpful. Thank you very much, Michelle.
Thanks, Dara. Philomena, you're next to go there if you'd like to unmute yourself. If you're muted. Hi.
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted.
Yeah,
hello.
All right.
Yeah, that was very good. That was an excellent presentation. I'm very hopeful about seeing UBI realised in my own lifetime now after this. And I'd like to know, has much work been done on the universal state pension idea? Because I think it's fantastic. I think it would be an excellent way to try and introduce UBI to a conservative Irish population. Because I've been advocating UBI for a while, and my goodness, it's challenging at times. So I would love to see more work done on the universal state pension.
Thanks, Philomena. And yes, I mean, it is challenging to advocate for it. And that's one of the things we were really disappointed about in terms of the Commission on Pension. They didn't actually look at a universal state pension, which is really disappointing because yet again, they're missing out on a whole cohort of people. And the auto enrollment system is still based on the premise, well, a young person is not going to be able to afford a home, but the state will provide some sort of income for you in older age because you won't own your own property. And I think we were very disappointed at the time that the Commission on Pension didn't look at the universal state pension. And I know other groups such as the National Women's Council, for example, and the Irish Senior Citizens Parliament, would advocate strongly for it. And I suppose the interesting point again is that the universal state pension is another gendered payment, really, because most of the people who are impacted by inadequate income in older age, they're women. And so that's just what makes it so incredibly disappointing, because it would have been a really positive step to set you on a very smooth sort of transition and pathway to a basic income system.
And I suppose if anyone is doing work on this, I'd happily volunteer myself, so I'd love to see this happen. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Shit.
Okay, now Aiden, you're next to go there. I apologise there, I clicked on mute.
Yeah, first of all, that was really, really interesting and I really enjoyed it. Thanks for that. I actually had two, but the first question was quite similar to Philomena's in terms of the differences between the current pension and the universal pension system. But also then going forward, if you were to implement something like this, my understanding might be great, but it seems social welfare, winter fuel allowance, it seems the government kind of see which way the wind is blowing and make up a number every October. Would this be more linked to other things like with the big, inflation is the buzzword at the moment? Going forward, would the ideas have more of a link to something like that rather than somebody in the Dáil saying, well, what'll make us popular come November,
Yeah, and I suppose that's a really interesting question, and it should be linked to something, and we would always argue it should be benchmarked not to inflation but to a percentage of average earnings, because generally earnings rise high, they generally tend to rise higher than inflation. And if our welfare system had been benchmarked, and we've always asked for 27.5%, which is was €222 a week, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in now, where we've had the third announcement today, not very targeted measures that don't really, and the people who are kind of most impacted at the moment are the bottom 20%, so the bottom two income deciles. So and in there you have a concentration of older people living alone, particularly in rural areas, a concentration of people who are long-term unemployed, lone parent families, and people with a disability, and people who are unemployed. That is the group that is in there. And not all of those are entitled to the fuel allowance. And sort of throwing money at, and even the money that's been spent on that is actually quite small. Most 3/4 of the money plus that has actually been spent, and this is the third announcement, have gone on universal measures. But it's the cost of living issue. It's not a universal problem. It's really a problem for people who don't have any additional savings or disposable income or financial wiggle room. Those are the people you need to target with the limited money you have, not give everybody a €200 electricity credit for your home. A very bad use of resources. But that's a long way of saying that, yes, it should be benchmarked, and we would always argue it's better to benchmark against wages than inflation.
Okay, thanks for that.
That's great. Thanks, Aiden. And 1 second now, do we have any more questions? Actually, okay, just while we're waiting, Michelle, in case anyone else has a question, I remember a debate on this, and I think one person was saying something to the effect, sure, he'll go out and work. Who would get out and work if there was a basic income there for people? And then the fellow on the other side said, Well, it's very simple. After your basic, after you do universal income, you tax the person on every hour they work, but they're still making money. So even if they work for an hour a day, it's always more beneficial, because there's so many traps within our current system where people have to limit themselves to working, say, 20 hours. They're better off for working part-time. So would this remove those kind of traps that's there for people?
Well, I suppose it removes those kind of disincentives, is what they're called. And I don't like that term. They're basically kind of unemployment traps and it's for very few people, but it's like the jump that if you go into employment, and unless you're starting in a reasonably paid job, you lose. The minute you start employment, you tend to lose so you might lose your medical card, for example. And if you have, either if you have a chronic illness or if you have children or any, losing a medical card is a significant cost to a household. And will you be earning enough money to make up for that loss? Generally, starting off, you're not going to be. So this would kind of eliminate those kind of disincentives and traps, because you always get more from employment than not. I mean, it's a basic income. It's going to be a minimum floor. And any of the sort of evaluations of studies have shown that it hasn't had a negative impact on labor market, but it's activity, but it's given people more choice. And what it has done, actually, it's promoted, I suppose, entrepreneurship and micro enterprises more, because, people have that cushion to go and, actually take a chance on something that they might want to do. What it would do actually within the labor market, it would probably mean that certain jobs which are, not very attractive would have to be very well remunerated, because you would have the option now, if you had a basic income, you may not have to do that job anymore. So it would probably change those dynamics within the labor market. Some of the, not particularly attractive, low paid jobs would have to have better rates of pay in order to attract people into them, which is no bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. Okay, Aiden, your hand is up again.
Yeah, sorry, no, I should have asked this one. The first, was in any of the studies, is there any concern that as these are rolled out, either different service providers, could be fuel, could be this, could be that, the other, where would start, jacking up their prices? We've seen with a lot of the petrol and diesel and stuff recently, that the second the government brought in a very short term, very not well thought out measure, the impact of that was gone within a day or two. People were just jacking up. Is there any concerns about that, like inflationary wise, or
in terms of an inflationary impact?
Yeah,
I suppose that would probably be one of the disadvantages of doing the all at once thing, the overnight approach. It would certainly be why most sort of countries would probably choose a gradual approach, because you would certainly reduce the opportunity for that, and you would probably be able to see, well, what sort of is it having an inflationary impact or not? If it is, then what do you need to do to adjust that? Because, as you say, the excise duty, stamp duty is a prime example, the Help to Buy scheme, all of those, as long as somebody knows, if it's targeted for a particular thing, that everybody looking for that thing has an additional 20 euros, 200 euros, 2,000 euros, then all that happens is the price just goes up by that amount. So that is certainly an argument for doing it over a gradual period of time, so you don't overnight end up everyone getting an additional amount of money a week, and then retailers and other services just putting up their prices accordingly. You kind of need time to let things sort of bed down, I suppose, economically.
Okay, thanks for that, Aiden. Okay, before we finish up, do we have any further questions for our guest this evening? Okay, I think that's about it. Michelle, very, very informative. Thank you very much, and very much appreciated. Thanks for joining us this evening. Oh, hang on. We have another hand up. Aiden, are you back with us? Oh, sorry, it's not 6 glasses. Understood, mate. Sorry, I say it every meeting. I have to get glasses, and I will. Sooner or later, I'll get them. Oh, okay, Michelle. On behalf of the association and our guests, I would like to thank you for joining us this evening. Fantastic presentation. We will be up on YouTube. So if you missed any of tonight's presentation or Q&A session and you'd like to catch up, we do usually have the video up within a week to a fortnight of the event itself. So I'd like to just thank Kat and Aiden as well for assisting during the meeting tonight. And on behalf of the association, take care of yourselves, everybody, and bye for now.